Hello friends and welcome back to the shop. I'm Buddy, and this week I'm building another helmet from the Star Wars universe, specifically Luke's Rebel X-Wing helmet. To make the helmet, I've used some techniques I haven't tried before, like plastic welding to attach the pieces and vacuum forming to create the visor. So let's see how those turn out. And we get to see Luke wear this helmet through the films, and we get some amazing close-ups specifically in The Empire Strikes Back, which really helped when it came time to the painting. So let's head to the studio and get started. Okay, so naturally the pieces had to be printed first, and I always try to position the pieces on the bed to avoid as much supports as possible. And since the helmet will get a lot of post-processing, I set my layer height to 0.2. Once the pieces are finished, I want to smooth them as much as possible before assembling. I've shown this process, which has never failed me many times on my channel before, so I will move through the steps fairly quickly. I begin by sanding with some 120 grit sandpaper on my hand sander. This starts to remove the print lines, and using the hand sander speeds up the process a little, but you don't want to stay in one spot for too long because the friction will cause damage to the print surface. After the hand sander, I use a piece of 120 and try to get into all the areas the sander couldn't reach too well. Then I switch to some 220 and sand again. You'll notice that the visible print layer lines are beginning to disappear, and by using black filament, it's easier to see what has been sanded and what hasn't. After that, I use some 400 grit, and this is really just to clean up the surface and remove a lot of the sanding lines at this point. You can see the difference between the unsanded and the sanded piece. There is still some texture visible, but using the next several steps, it'll hide them and they'll never be seen. But first, with all the pieces sanded, I'm going to assemble them together. As an initial hold, I'm using a tiny bit of CA glue so I can align the ends together. Once I'm happy with their placement, I use a couple of drops of zip kicker to cure the glue so I can move on to the next spot and repeat the process. I'm starting with the dome of the helmet, and I'll work my way down the sides. No particular reason as to why, I've just found it to be a little easier. Now, to plastic weld, I'm going to work on the inside, and I'm going to use a heated wood burner and some excess pieces of filament that were left on a roll. This is my first time trying this technique, so let's see how it goes, fingers crossed. I first straightened out the curve in the filament and aligned the piece on the inside with the seam. Then using the wood burner, I heat up the filament and a small area around the seam on the helmet and blend the two soft areas together with the wood burner. I wanted to try this technique because I've always been nervous about how fragile CA glue is, and when assembling helmets, it's difficult to have enough surface to allow a multi-glue situation. But with the welding, I'm basically fusing the two separate pieces into one, and the potential for the seam to fail is virtually null at this point. So here it is, fully assembled and welded, and I'm really happy with how sturdy it feels. I also tried a few spots of welding on the outside to fill in some small gaps, but I won't be doing that again because they were extremely difficult to sand back down. It seemed that the filament became even harder with the wood burner. I'm not sure as to why. Maybe it heats the filament to a higher temp than the extruder does. I'm just not sure, but I know I won't be doing it again. To fill the seams on the outside, I'm using glazing and spot putty. I'm smearing it on thickly with a palette knife, and the reason I'm applying it thick is because it does shrink slightly as it dries and seams can open up or dents in the putty can be seen afterwards. So thick is key, and the palette knife helps push the putty into the crevice. You don't want this stuff to touch your bare skin because it is toxic. Even with me applying it thick, you can see how it's sunk and opened up in some spots. That's no big deal, I can apply more on top, but first I want to sand some of it away to see what I'm really working with, and to do that I'm using the 220. I've placed a piece of scrap paper underneath because this does create quite a mess, so keep pets and children away, and it's probably best to wear a face mask as well unless you want to be blowing out red boogers later on. Okay, with the initial layer sanded, I can better see where to apply some more putty. The seams need to be invisible when the helmet gets painted, so it's worth taking the extra time to prep them now before moving on. While I continue with that, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you never miss a new project. Thank you! Okay, with the second layer of putty sanded, it's time to start prepping the surface for paint. I first apply a layer of putty mixed with acetone. This will sink into any tough to sand areas or fine sanding lines or layer lines that might feel smooth to the touch but will become visible when painted. Once that's dry, which should only take about 45 minutes to an hour depending on the humidity in your area, I smooth it with the 400 grit. This will remove the brush marks, and don't be worried if some of the print is visible, it's bound to happen on smooth areas. Plus, remember, this makes a mess as well, so just be prepared for that. Alright, so we're looking pretty smooth. Not perfect, but good enough to move forward with the next step, which is spraying the helmet with a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. This stuff will act as a primer layer for our paint, and it is also sandable, which will allow us to achieve that smooth casted plastic look like in the films. I'll spray the helmet with 2 generous coats to make sure it's thoroughly filled and coated, but I'll wait 30 minutes between each coat. After I let it completely cure overnight, I wet sand the helmet with the 400 grit. I just dip the sandpaper in the water and then sand the surface of the helmet. This will remove any unevenness in the putty and primer and begin to polish up the surface so we can get that glass-like finish. After the 400, I repeat the same process with 1000 grit the exact same way. This 1000 grit will really polish up the surface, giving a really smooth, shiny finish. It does generate this sludge, so as I go, I like to periodically wipe down the surface with a soft cloth to remove it. In my case, I'm using an old pair of briefs. And by removing the sludge, it allows me to better see the finish and if there's any spots I missed or that need some more attention. So here we are, a silky smooth surface ready for paint. And to act as a base layer, I'm using this glossy white. I'm not spraying it too thick because I want to avoid runs. They're not so easy to get rid of at this stage. I'm spraying thin layers and building up to make sure I get complete even coverage. I believe I sprayed it 4 times and let it sit for about half an hour between each layer. Okay, we're dry, looking slick, clean, and shiny, so I can move forward with adding the colors. Now at this point you can paint the helmet however you want, but in my case I'm painting it to look like Luke's. So I use painter's tape to create the striping on the crest. I think I'm going to focus on each color at a time to make it a little easier, and then I'll apply the stencil details. But before applying any paint, I'm going to brush on some liquid latex to spots. This works great as a masking fluid to create scratches and chipping. I'm applying it sporadically and just have to wait for it to dry. I'm going to start with the dark maroon color, which was mixed from these 3 colors. Using an airbrush to apply, I want the effect to look uneven, so I'm keeping the airbrush pretty close to the surface and spraying heavily in spots and letting other areas be lighter, because I want the paint job to look weathered and worn. For the small details on the sides, I'm just using a brush for those. This small little circle greebly and the square greebly can get the maroon. I'm not too worried about the edges because those will be covered later on. When the paint is dry, I peel away the tape, and where the latex is touching the tape, it peels up, creating an amazing chipped edge. And I gotta tell you, this is so oddly satisfying to do this. Any spot where the latex doesn't come off can simply be rubbed with a finger and the latex will just peel away. All the maroon edges get lined with a black. I'm using a black acrylic I've thinned with water with a 00 brush and very carefully hand painting along the edges, making sure to avoid the chip spots. The sides of the crest go maroon as well, so I prep those with the tape and the latex, and then repeat the painting process with the airbrush. I went through quite a bit of blue tape on this project, but the results were worth it. After those dried, I removed the tape and reapplied some new tape because on these sides there are some thin yellow stripes that follow the crest and wrap down the back bottom edge. When the red's tape was removed, it pulled up the latex, so I reapply some latex for the yellow. This will create a nice effect that I'll show you in just a few. The stripes are sprayed with a goldenrod yellow, and I'm trying to airbrush straight down to avoid the paint sneaking under the edge of the tape. Once dry and the tape's removed, it's looking like this, and there's the effect I'm talking about where the latex was reapplied. You end up with 2 chipping edges showing the various layers, which I think is looking pretty cool. Next, I painted the yellow lines around the curved edges over the ears. At this point, I think I want to add the Rebel symbol stencils. I made sure each side was lined up to the mirror of each other, applied latex, and then sprayed them with the maroon. Then I spray these stencils with the black I've been using for the lining around the maroon and yellow. Alright, I almost forgot these fishhook shapes and the front box on the crest need to go gray, and luckily the 2-in-1 spray I used earlier is the correct color, so I spray those areas with it. And there is also a gray stripe that runs along through here, but I have to get the blue tape out of the way first. And here's how the gray looks when in dry. The latex technique also works with spray paints and primers as well. Next, I painted the black lines which follow these curved shapes on the sides, and this is what I meant when I said you can rub away the latex that's left behind. On the crest box, I tape off some lines and spray those with the yellow. Then inside the black lines, I spray 2 yellow circles near the front and 3 maroon near the back on each side. Then using the V stencil, I pounce in some black on top of each circle, with the open part of the V facing up and the point facing down. Initially I applied too much latex because it removed too much detail, so I ended up redoing these circles. Now for the chin strap. You'll need a piece of elastic about 16.5 inches long, and you want to cut a small hole in each end like so. The elastic feeds through the back of the cup, over the front, and down through the second slot. And this bump is on the front of the piece, so make sure that is facing out when you go to attach it. The strap gets attached on the inside just up from this hollow area about here. I've marked the location with a Sharpie so I don't have to think as I attach, I can focus solely on attaching. I first begin by heating up the spot with my wood burner, and while it's still soft, I press the elastic into the melted plastic with the wood burner as well. This will melt the two together since elastic is basically plastic in itself, but it does create a stink, so take precautions. Next, I use some scrap filament and weld this around the edge of the elastic about 1 inch on each side and in the hole cut into the elastic. This way, it'll permanently be attached and it won't go anywhere. The helmet in the film has a black rubber strip around the back edge of the helmet. I wasn't able to find anything that would work that I was happy with, so I ended up using a strip of 2mm foam, which worked just as well when I attached it with CA glue. Now it was time to age up the helmet. I first sprayed on some thin burnt umber, which works great as a dirt color and a smoke damage color. Then using a paper towel, I dabbed the surface to create a dirty blotchy effect, and then flick some isopropyl alcohol onto the area. This creates some nice splatter marks in the paint and dries quickly before it can run. I want my helmet to look really weathered like this picture of Luke's, so I'm repeating the process with some of the black as well to really add some of that battle damage we see in the film. The last element is the visor, and unfortunately I'm going to rush through this because if I don't, this video will be like over 100 hours long. So I highly recommend checking out Bill's videos over at Punished Props Academy. He goes into amazing detail about the whole vacuum forming and dyeing processes. But in the meantime, I'm using a sheet of 0.04 PETG that I placed in the oven to heat it until it became soft and started to sag. With my visor buck already on the vacuum box, I turn on the vacuum and bring the heated plastic sheet and press down over the buck until I get a seal and the vacuum pulls it tight. Next, I cut out the visor and leave excess along the top edge so I have something to attach to, but as you can see, it's not the right color. To get the right color, I'm going to dye it with this golden yellow dye packet. It's meant for synthetic fabrics and works great on plastics as well. Make sure you follow the inside instructions, and the packet comes with a dissolvable dye packet and a color intensifier. In a pot of boiling water, drop the dye packet and empty out the intensifier. Stir until you don't see any clumps and let it boil, and then maintain a temperature no higher than 100 degrees Celsius when you drop your visor in. It'll take several dunkings until the correct color is reached, but that's expected. Just keep your dye bath at a regular temperature in between dunks. Then the visor can be glued into the helmet with CA glue. And boom, the Luke X-Wing Rebel helmet is finished. A lot of steps, but nothing unachievable. I'm definitely in love with the plastic welding. It really makes the helmet seem more sturdy, and I'm not afraid of the seams opening back up once the glue fails. So I'm definitely going to keep this in mind and use it in future projects. I've used the latex technique before, and I'm always thrilled when I see the results. It's a great masking fluid that goes a long way and is pretty cheap. And if you've watched any of my other videos before, you'll know how I'm a sucker when it comes to adding aging to a piece. The more the better, I think. It gives the piece character and history. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this project as much as I did. I learned a lot and will definitely be using that knowledge for future projects. If you want to make your own Rebel helmet, a link to the files can be found in the description. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.